Today, we're talking about the Maccabees, the huge role they played for the people of God between the Old Testament and the New Testament, their connection to Hanukkah, and how they contributed to Jewish expectations for the coming Messiah. Expectations that Jesus definitely didn't line up with. We'll also cover some more general history between 323 BC and 37 BC for kind of what happened in the region of Judea and around Jerusalem. Welcome to the Thinking Believer, part 3 of our Between the Testaments series. You can go back and watch those videos if you want, but this should also stand alone pretty well. Our goal for this is really just helping us better understand the world of the New Testament by learning a little bit more about the context and hopefully answering some questions that you maybe never even knew you had. Last week we ended with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC at the age of just 32, and he had no clear successor because he was just 32. Power passed to his brother, Philip III, and his infant son, with his generals left in charge as governors of the land he conquered. His generals didn't exactly play nicely, though, eventually leading to 3 separate kingdoms around 300 BC. Ptolemy I founded a dynasty in Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty. Seleucus got Babylonia/Persia, which became the Seleucid Empire, and the Antigonid kingdom was in control of Macedonia. And again, in the spirit of foreshadowing, this is how big the Roman Empire was at the time. We'll check back in on them a little bit later. The traditional lands of Judah and Jerusalem were in a really inconvenient place in this new arrangement, right on the borders between 2 large kingdoms that were often not on the best of terms with one another. And from the very beginning, there was dispute over who had the rightful claim to the area. Between 300 BC and 200 BC, there were 5 wars known as the Syrian Wars fought for this region specifically. By the end of that, Jerusalem and the surrounding area were in Seleucid hands. Under both rulers, the Jews who lived in and around Jerusalem were honestly mostly left to rule themselves under the high priest as long as they paid their taxes. But while the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires were duking it out, the Seleucid Empire came into conflict with an expanding Rome to the west and its Greek allies in Greece and Asia Minor. This did not go well for the Seleucids. They were defeated at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC, and they lost a bunch of Turkey, which sounds like a Thanksgiving joke. That was a long way from Jerusalem, but as part of the treaty to end the fighting, the Seleucids agreed to pay the Romans gobs of money. That meant taxes went up in Jerusalem and Judea, which didn't earn the Seleucids many fans, and left the Jews longing for the good old days when they were ruled by Ptolemy and Egypt, not these big bully Seleucids. One of the people unimpressed with the Seleucids and their taxes was Onias, the high priest. His brother Jason, on the other hand, liked their rulers. He was part of a group that historians refer to as the Hellenizers. They liked Greek culture and wanted more of it, so they were more than willing to cozy up to the Seleucids as long as it meant more baths and outdoor sporting events. On behalf of the Hellenizers, Jason, the brother of Onias, the high priest, headed off to meet the emperor of the Seleucids, Antiochus, and offered him even more tax revenue in exchange for making him the high priest in his brother's place. Antiochus was all about that. Probably in part because Onias, the current high priest, was not really a fan, and then also, hey, more money. He ousted Onias, but that set something of a bad precedent. A few years later, in 171 BC, another Judean, Menelaus, offered to double the tax revenue on to the Seleucids if they would make him high priest, and the Seleucids accepted that too. But not only were the Jewish people not keen on more taxes, according to 2 Maccabees chapter 4, Menelaus wasn't even a Levite, the tribe of the priests. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. So more taxes and heresy, all in one package. Not long after this, the Seleucids marched off to war with the Ptolemies in Egypt, and word reached Jerusalem that the Seleucid emperor Antiochus had been killed in the battle. The Jews in Jerusalem figured that made it a perfect time to kick out Menelaus, and kick him out they did. Unfortunately, the reports of Antiochus' death were greatly exaggerated. So, on his way back up north after being defeated by the Egyptians and not in the best mood, Antiochus decided to put the Judeans in their place. He stopped at Jerusalem, destroyed its walls, made it illegal to participate in any Jewish religious practices, and looted the temple before converting it into a temple of Zeus. The temple was considered to be the place where the literal presence of God dwelled. The innermost room, the Holy of Holies, was so holy, it was only entered once a year by a single priest and only after elaborate cleansing rituals. And now there was a statue of Zeus in it. Antiochus thought that by removing the holiness of the temple, he would break their identity and spirits and make them easier to rule. He was mistaken. Enter the Hasmonean family, more popularly known as the Maccabees, for whom the Books of the Maccabees in the Catholic and Orthodox Old Testaments are named. In the last video, we talked both about canons in the Books of Maccabees, but also about how the Greek language spread through this part of the world. And one interesting example of that is while 1st Maccabees was written in Hebrew, 2nd through 4th Maccabees were written in Greek, which just helps illustrate the way that the common language was shifting through the period from Hebrew and Aramaic to more and more Greek. One of the Hasmoneans, Mattathias, started a rebellion when he refused to sacrifice to the Greek gods and actually stabbed a Jew who was willing to. It's a pretty intense story. But it's his son, Judas, named Maccabeus, Aramaic for the hammer, who was really definitive for the movement. Judas organized a guerrilla rebellion and was pretty darn good at it. He defeated a series of Seleucid armies far larger and better armed than his own until Antiochus decided that he'd really rather focus on the borders of his empire rather than fighting with Jewish rebels in the middle of it. 3 years after Zeus moved into the temple, he was given the boot and it was purified and rededicated. It's this event that the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah commemorates. Unfortunately for Antiochus and the Seleucids, the Maccabees and their rebel forces figured that they'd had so much success winning their religious freedoms, why stop there? They fought for the next 20 years for their independence until they eventually won it in 142 BC. And unfortunately for the Maccabees, or the Hasmoneans, all but one of them died by the time they won their independence. And, unfortunately for the rest of the Jews in Palestine, by the time they won, the Maccabees had lost many of the ideals that they were fighting for to begin with. For example, one of the Maccabees managed to pit 2 factions of the Seleucid Empire against each other by accepting an appointment as the high priest. But, if you recall, letting foreign kings name the high priest, particularly one who wasn't a Levite, was one of the things that started this whole mess to begin with. The Hasmoneans ruled for about 80 years. Some were good, some weren't. In 76 BC, Salome Alexandra, note that this is a Greek name, which again shows us the way that the world is being Hellenized at the time. She governed as a civil ruler between the death of her husband and the coming of age of her 2 sons, and she genuinely seems to have been about the best of the bunch. She had 2 sons. These 2 handsome gentlemen were Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. More Greek names. I'm actually not sure about Hyrcanus, and I'm certainly not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so don't quote me. But these 2 went to war with one another upon her death. Hyrcanus wasn't as ambitious as most of his family, but he did have someone to pull his strings, an Idumean politician named Antipater, who you might know as the father of King Herod, who we'll meet in the future. Both Aristobulus and Hyrcanus invited the Romans to intervene on their behalf in the Civil War, which, spoiler alert, did not go well for their people long term. But that is a story for next time. This was the last time in antiquity that the Jewish people would govern themselves. And one very short reflection this week. If you were living in this area around the 1st century when Jesus was born and you were waiting for a Messiah, God's anointed one who would save your people and establish a kingdom that would last forever, you were probably expecting someone who looked a lot like Judas Maccabeus, someone who would have the nickname the Hammer, or a guerrilla general who would throw off the occupying Roman Empire. That was what you probably had in mind. Jesus was not that kind of Messiah. And for me, having that in mind helps me understand the reactions to Jesus that we often read about in the New Testament. One of my favorite videos that I've done so far is Are the Right Names in the Bible? And if you'll remember from that video, or if you want to go watch it, in the 1st century, 6 of the 9 most popular boys' names in this area were from the Hasmonean family. One illustration of this is that 2 of Jesus's disciples were named Judas. I think it's a really good reminder for me that when I come to the Bible, I need to carefully check my expectations of what God is up to and what he's planning to do, and make sure that I am really seeking him and not just my expectations for him and what he'll be doing. Thank you so much for coming back to us for another video. I love doing this. I hope you do too. If you are interested in more content like this, please like and subscribe. If I missed anything, I am all about learning and would love to hear anything. I'm 100% sure I didn't get all those pronunciations right. I also said that I was going to be ending each week with a book review, and this time I forgot my prop. But another source for a lot of this series is The New Testament and the People of God by N.T. Wright, which is just a wonderful resource talking about a lot of the context that we've been sharing here. So if you're interested, N.T. Wright, The New Testament and the People of God is a wonderful resource for learning more. Again, like, subscribe, and we'd love to see you around next time.